Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today we are joined by Jesse Granger, who does fantastic work for The Athletic, covering the Vegas Golden Knights and obviously the Cup champs. So that must have been a pretty cool ride. So thanks so much, Jesse, for coming on and taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It's been a long summer, but an exciting summer. So it's been a lot of fun.
Do you like that you had to work an extra couple months more so than usual?
Yeah, I mean, there's trade-offs to it. Obviously, it takes up most of your I mean, half your off season, but it was in the when you're in it, you don't mind it at all. I mean, it was a really fun run. I hadn't really been on a run like that since the first year. Obviously, the Golden Knights have been to quite a few conference final runs, but they were like pandemic years. So it was like in the bubble. I wasn't there because we couldn't get across the border to do that. And then the following year, it was still like limited access with the pandemic. So we were just still doing things on Zoom. So basically, it had been 6 years since I had been on a playoff run like that with the traveling back and forth from the cities. So it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Well, what was it like to cover that team and also just be in the building for when the Stanley Cup is given out?
Yeah, it was exciting. I mean, this business, like to me, when this job is at its most fun, its most exhilarating is when you're covering meaningful games. And obviously, on a cup run, every single one of those games is meaningful. You're going to the rink every night with like the excitement of like I think during the NHL regular season there are so many games that you find yourself like, okay, I don't want to overreact to this or this. So you find yourself like trying to temper like, okay, that was a great play or this player had a great game, but at the same time, does it really mean that much? It's an 82 game season. But then once you get to the playoffs, it's you can't overreact to anything. Like everything is the season is on the line. So I love that part of the playoffs where every play that's made is the biggest play of that player's life and you can really just like overreact to everything. It's great. So that part of it was fun. Obviously, them winning the cup was really cool. Reporters that cover that get to do something that I'd never done before and that a lot of people have never done, and that's go down on the ice while the cup is being passed around and all the families are down there. And it was really cool. Obviously, getting to congratulate the players and talk to them and get their thoughts on it was fun, but I really enjoyed talking to the family members. A lot of them came up to me and just started chatting, and you get to know a lot of them that you haven't seen over the last 6 years. And some of them follow you on Twitter. You're kind of the conduit between them and their son or their uncle or their niece or sorry, their nephew, whatever it is. Like there are so many people that, oh, my girlfriend's dating this player. So sorry, my sister is dating this player. There's so many different people connected to these players that follow you on Twitter. And I have no idea who they are. And they come up to you and they're like, it's been so cool following Zach Whitecloud the last 3 seasons through you. So that part of it was really cool and just getting to meet them. And obviously you'll never find a group of people in a better mood than the players and their families after they just won the Stanley Cup. So it was really cool. I enjoyed the entire process, and the end was, and obviously the parade was was a lot of fun to cover too.
Yeah, no. And then how was that, like the whole, like what did it mean to you to cover a team that won the cup? Like, is that something when you, because I always think for reporters when you're a beat writer, how does that impact? Do you feel like you're maybe a bit biased in terms of them wanting to, for in this case the Golden Knights winning the cup? Like, do you feel like you're like almost a fan in a sense, or is it more I just want to cover a good team and then cover the meaningful games?
You know what? I can only speak for myself. I never find it hard to not like be a fan of the team. For me, I always find myself rooting for the storylines. So like I may have us like, here's a great example. Before the cup final, so they had a week off because they had finished the conference final so quickly. They had quite a bit of time off. So I got to sit down with Adin Hill and I worked on this really big story on how Adin Hill found yoga during the pandemic. And he discovered this app and it just changed the way he like operates, and he does yoga on every game day and all this stuff. And so I've got this story, but instead of running it right then, I had a conversation with my editors and we're all kind of planning what we're going to do for the cup final. And I told them, look, I've got this story on Adin Hill and how he changed to yoga and how his flexibility improved. If I could just get a big acrobatic save out of Adin Hill, At some point in the cup final, I'll have this story and I can just boom, run it right
Yeah.
there. So I'm so from that point on, I'm now rooting for Adin Hill to make this big save. I don't care if they win. I don't care. I just need him to make this big save in a big moment. That way my story can run. So selfishly, as a writer, I often find myself rooting for the narrative that I already have this great story. Just give me a reason to put it out there. And then obviously Adin Hill makes that paddle save in game one. I did not have to wait long for that story to run. And it was perfect. I had that story ready. It ran right after like that night. And I had something that like everyone was writing about the paddle save, right? Like that was the big moment. Everyone's writing about it that night, but I already had something that other people didn't have. So I was able to differentiate my coverage. So yeah, it's a long way of answering. I feel like I mostly am rooting for selfishly to make my job. If I've got a storyline set up, please let this happen so that I can just run this story and don't have to come up with something brand new on the fly. That's pretty much how my rooting interest lies in these games.
With that, because I find that so interesting that you have a story almost in place and you think so far ahead to Adin Hill making this big save or whoever it may be, of course. What is your writing process like? Is that something you do a lot during the regular season? Like, how do you approach your writing? Is it a lot of future based for kind of feature stories? Like, how do you map it out? Because it seems as though you definitely have plans for some stories.
Yeah, I do. I like doing that. I like just talking to the guys and finding something unique and finding something cool and then kind of waiting for the moment to write that. Because I think a lot of times the moment almost means more in terms of like the success of the story, how many people subscribe, how many people read it. If it can make a huge difference. The same story that's written just as well can perform very differently if you just run it on a random Friday night, or if you run it after that guy scores a hat trick. So yes, I do a lot of pre-reporting and kind of thing, and I'll kind of have things in my notebook that I'll just talk to guys. I like to go into the locker room and talk to guys like off the record, just talk to them. And I'm lucky enough at the Athletic, I'm not having to write, like if you're at a newspaper that's expecting a story every single day, you don't really have the luxury of doing that. At the Athletic, I have a little bit of a lighter load. I'm able to go in there every day and just kind of talk to guys, and they'll say something interesting. They'll tell me something that they started doing, or just interesting little tidbits. I'll put that away in the mental notebook. Okay, I have something on this player that's interesting. Let me see if I can, and then I'll go in there and ask them about it and get some quotes, prepare that story. And then when they do whatever it is, I've got something big. That happens a lot more in the playoffs.
Okay.
During the regular season, not as much, because there aren't big of moments in the regular season that you're like banking on. But throughout this cup run, I was doing a lot of that. Obviously, the Hill one that I talked about, I had a story on White Cloud and Hague, and how they had pretty much grown up in pro hockey together. And I was waiting, and then White Cloud scores the game winner in the cup final. So I ran that story then. And then I had the story on Jack Eichel that I had talked to his father and his like juniors coach and all these people. I worked on that story for a long time, and I basically needed them to win the Stanley Cup for that story to run. So that's another one where it's like, I'm not like rooting for the Golden Knights, but I do have this awesome story that if they win the cup, I get to just plug in and run the next morning. So that made my life a lot easier when they won game 5 and I didn't have to fly back to Florida, and I was just able to run that Eichel story. And that was one of my favorite stories that I was able to write all postseason. So yes, it happens a lot in the playoffs where I plan stuff and I kind of am just waiting for the moment. But I do a lot of collecting and putting away and just waiting for stories to kind of happen during the regular season.
And how do you manage those relationships? Like you mentioned, going into the locker room, I'm sure that's been much easier since the COVID shutdown ended, kind of, especially in the States. But how do you manage those relationships? And then let's say you write a piece on their 7-game losing streak and Jack Eichel's not playing well, but then you want to have a story on Jack Eichel. Like, how do you manage those relationships with players and management, but also get access to talk to these players and write stories about them?
Yeah. Like you mentioned, the access helps a lot. I think that during the pandemic and directly after, when we were just talking to them on Zoom, I realized how much harder it is to do this job because your only contact with these players is one question on Zoom. And I don't get to like have a conversation with them. It's just one question. I get to raise my hand. They give me one question. And because I only have one question, I can't ask a bunch of other stuff. I've got to just ask the most important question. And a lot of times it's something critical. So these guys don't ever see me. The only contact they ever have with me for a year is me asking them tough questions. They're probably fed up with me. Like I would be fed up with me if I was them. So whereas now we're back to normal, we get to go in the locker room. I can go in there and I can talk to, we'll just use White Cloud as an example. I can go into there and White Cloud's a golfer, just like me. We both love golf. Any moment we have away from our jobs, we're golfing. So I'm constantly going in there and like every day I'm like, hey, so what course did you play this week? Oh, he tells me what course he played. Oh, nice. How'd you play? Oh, I'm hitting my long irons. Good. Blah, blah, blah. You're a human. You're like, you have human conversations. And then when White Cloud makes the turnover that loses the game, I can write a critical piece about how he screwed this up and they lost. And he understands that that's my job to do. And he understands that I don't dislike him as a person. We're going to talk about golf when I go in there next week. He just knows that his job is to score goals and be good at hockey. My job is to write what happens out there. And sometimes when they mess up, I'm going to have to write it. So I think it makes it a lot easier when you're having regular contact with them and you're talking to them. And it also, the other thing is like a lot of times I'll go into the room after the game and not with a bunch of cameras and microphones in their face. I'll just ask them like, what happened on this goal? Like who's like, and they can explain to me, oh, it was this assignment, because it's not always in hockey. It's not always obvious whose fault it was. Like sometimes a guy will be to blame on TV, but the reason he was put in a horrible spot by someone else making a mistake. And then everyone's roasting that guy and it actually wasn't his fault. So I think going in the room and being able to have conversations with them and not just ask one word questions that are on TV that everyone has to, because they're not going to they're not going to explain to a bunch of TV cameras why their buddy screwed up on a play. Like that's just, hockey players won't do that.
Yeah.
So I think the ability to just talk to them gives you a little better understanding of what's happening on the ice. It allows you to be more critical because you're sure of what you're writing. You're not wondering if it was this guy's fault or not. And then it also allows you to build the relationships with them so that when you write something critical, they understand that you're just doing your job. You're not out to get them or whatever. Yeah. And obviously some players that's easier than others, but that's to be expected.
That's part of the job, I'm sure. I want to go a little bit to kind of the Golden Knights themselves. Like what's maybe one thing that you'll always remember about this team, like having covered them and seen them winning the cup? Like what's just one thing that will maybe stick out of your mind other than maybe the Adin Hill save that you could put your story back in immediately?
Yeah, I mean, just you hear this every time a team wins, and it's like it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Like, do teams that win championships, are they all close in the locker room and are they all really good friends because they're winning, or are they winning partially because they're close? And this Golden Knights team was so close that first year, the first season when they went on that miraculous run like that. Like you ask guys even now that are on different teams that have moved on and they'll say like that was the closest locker room I've ever played for. There was something special about it. And then I think it kind of got chipped away over the last few years. And like, obviously they moved on from some really not just good players, but players that were popular in the room. Alex Tuck, Marc-Andre Fleury, some Nate Schmidt, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, guys that were really big pieces of that room. And it kind of shook the locker room up a little bit, I think. And this year it was the first time in 6 years that it felt like that first year. They were all just really close. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a little bit of Bruce Cassidy, his coaching job. I think he was phenomenal for this team. I think whatever it was, this group, I also think that they kind of rallied around Jack Eichel, and he had a really bad rap coming into this team about how he doesn't do the things to win games, and he's bad in the locker room and all this stuff. And none of that ended up being true. And I think they kind of rallied around that. And he was a really big part of why they were so tight in the locker room. But yeah, when I think back to this team, I think at least now, pretending I'm 10 years in the future, when I think back to this team, I'm going to remember how close they all were in the locker room, how like much fun they all had every day. And like, to me, Jonathan Marchessault is the ringleader for that. I mean, the guy he is the court jester on the team. He's hilarious. He's constantly talking trash to everyone in practice. He's hooping and hollering. He started this game where they're all betting each other who will score more goals in practice. So it'll be the middle of this drill on a Wednesday practice where most times it's like, we don't want to be here. We're here because we have to be. And Michael Amadio will score a goal that means nothing in practice. And the entire ice like explodes in excitement. Wow. Like in celebration. And the reason is because he just took the lead over Marchessault in this scoring game that they're playing. And everyone wants Marchessault to lose because he talks so much trash that they all can't stand it when he wins. So it's just things like that that liven up. It just felt like this group was having a lot of fun all year long. And I think you don't do that if you're not winning. Like the winning is part of that. You're never going to see a team that's in last place that's having fun every day. So, like I said, kind of the chicken and the egg thing. But when I think back to this team, I'm going to remember how close they were, how much fun they were having, and just how, like, Mark Stone said it best after they won the cup when he was on the ice. He said, "I just got to win the Stanley Cup with 30 of my best friends," and that felt genuine, not just something that he was saying.
And with that, like what I don't even, there's so many questions because this team was so fantastic in the playoffs. But I know you wrote about Adin Hill, and I think you had and not just the paddle save, but more about his new contract. And I think it's an interesting kind of maybe theory in hockey that people have been debating about in terms of how much do you pay goalies. And in your piece is about maybe they overpaid with Adin Hill in a 2-year, $4.9 million contract, but that it doesn't even matter. So maybe just tell us what you think about, like, should goalies being paid $9-10 million, or is it more effective in a cap era to pay 4 or 5 million, and maybe just talk a bit about that piece.
Yeah, I think there's not a position in sports, maybe in all of sports, that is more polarized when you talk to the decision makers, the GMs, than goalies in hockey, because it's so hard to predict. Like you give a Sergei Bobrovsky this long deal worth $10 million a year, and for the first 3 years of that deal, it looks like a total disaster. What did we do here? He's awful. And then all of a sudden he's the best player on the team, and he's the only reason they made it to the Stanley Cup final. So it's a tough position to predict. And the reason is because the stats, I play goalie, just I'll put the
I know that,
yeah. Goalie stats are so influenced by the team in front of them, whereas I think player stats aren't really influenced that much. Yes, some guys, if you play on a high scoring team, you're going to have more points. But if you play well, even if you're on a bad team, you're going to score a bunch of goals and your stats are going to look fine. Whereas a goalie can play really well on a bad team and his stats are awful. So I think we evaluate goalies off their stats way too much, and not just the media, teams, executives. I think we all as a group put too much stock into goalie stats, because I think it's more of a team stat than it is the goalie stat. So because of that, we never know what to do with the contracts. And I think my opinion is that there are some goalies out there that are worth 9-10 million a year, but only a few of them.
Okay.
And if you've got an Andrei Vasilevsky, I'll pay that guy whatever he wants. Hand him a blank check, whatever he feels like he needs to make. That's what I'm paying him, because he's the best in the world. Ilya Sorokin just signed a deal. He's worth every penny of that deal. He's probably going to be worth more than that deal pays him in the end. Igor Shesterkin, phenomenal goalie. Connor Hellebuck is the interesting one, because he's like, I think he's not quite Vasilevsky, but he's an elite goalie who's been a top 5 goalie for years, and he's still only 30 years old. Even he, right now, it looks like is maybe having some hard time finding teams that want to trade for him and give him a big contract. So I think if it were me, I either want an elite goalie and I'll pay him 10 million, or give me 2 pretty good goalies, an Adin Hill, someone in the middle. I think 5 million is a lot for Adin Hill. 4.9 million is a lot for Adin Hill. I think I'd much rather be paying him 3 million. I think I'd rather have a goalie of that caliber and pay him 3 million, and then try to build the best team around him. Because as we saw with the Golden Knights this year, if you have a good defense and you make things easy on the goalie, even not elite goalies can put up elite stats. I mean, the Golden Knights, Jonathan Quick was the worst goalie in the entire NHL, like bar none. He, like, out of 113 goalies that stepped on the ice, he was 113th. Like, he was awful. Yeah. And he comes in and he wins 4 games in a row behind this team, because the defense is so good that anyone that's good enough to compete at this level is going to be able to play well behind him. So I think there are 2 very different strategies. Is it easy to build a team good enough to where the goalie doesn't matter? No, it's not. It's very difficult. And like Vegas did it this year. How sustainable is it? We're going to see moving forward. How easy is it to do for other teams to try to mimic? Probably not very easy. You've got to have the right system. You've got to have the right players. Their defense is so good in Vegas. So I think it's tough to do. But I think if it were me, if I can't get my hands on one of those elite goalies, because they're hard to find, right? There's only a few of them. If I can't get one of those guys, I'd much rather try to build the team and get me some pretty good goalies, and a bunch of them, 2 or 3, so that you can rotate them and you can play the hot hand. And Adin Hill wasn't the best goalie on the Golden Knights all year. At that certain points, Logan Thompson was the best goalie. At certain points, Laurent Brossoit was the best goalie. And then Adin Hill was the best goalie at the most important time. If you're just relying on Adin Hill to be awesome all year, probably not going to happen. But when he has a bad month, Logan Thompson has a good month, you're going to be fine. So you need more than one if you're gonna go with goalies of that caliber in that kind of tier. You can't just lean on one guy. Igor Shesterkin, he's going to be our guy this year. He's playing all the important games. He's going to win all the games we need him to win. That's a totally different strategy.
Well, with that, because you alluded to how good this team defensively was, how much of that was just an awesome decor? I think most people, especially after this run, would say Vegas had the best just decor itself, but how much of that was the D themselves? How much of that was the forwards chipping in and Bruce Cassidy's system? Maybe just tell us, how much do you think their amazing defense was like? Who do we give all the kind of just who do you think was the key for it?
Yeah, I'm going to cop out and say all of it. That's the cop out answer, but I think it's true. I think so the Golden Knights defense core is super talented, and I think its best asset is its depth. Alex Pietrangelo, phenomenal number one defenseman, but he's not one of the top 5 defensemen in the league. I mean, you've got like Cale Makar and Victor Hedman and Adam Fox and Erik Karlsson, but he's a very good number one. And then you've got Alec Martinez. They make a great top pair. And then you've got Braden McNabb and Shea Theodore. They're a excellent second pair that would be a first pair on some teams. And then you've got Zach Whitecloud and Nick Hague, 2 young guys that really developed. And I think they're good enough to be second pairs on some teams. I think they're without a doubt the best bottom pair in the NHL. And what that does is not only are they good, but they also play more than most bottom pairs, which takes some of the
pressure,
the load off of Pietrangelo and Martinez. And Pietrangelo and Martinez are on the wrong side of 30. If you play them 28 minutes a night, they're going to be worn down by the time you get to the playoffs. And they weren't, because Hague and Whitecloud played so much, and not just the amount of minutes, but they play tough minutes. Cassidy wasn't afraid to throw them out there against top lines. So it takes a little bit of the weight off the shoulders of the top guys. And I think it kept them all fresh. And it's part of the reason they didn't have many injuries in the playoffs, is because they were so deep. They didn't have to work. They didn't have to overwork guys. But the forwards deserve a ton of credit. I mean, when you go down the line and you look at the Golden Knights forwards, there aren't many elite scorers on this team. They're very good 200-foot players. It's how they build their team. I was just at the draft talking with Bob Lowe's, their director of player personnel, and I was like asking him, like, how come every player you draft, the first thing out of their mouth is, when I ask every player that they draft, describe yourself as a player, 200-foot player, two-way player. They all love that. That's the forward that the Golden Knights like. Mark Stone is as good as it gets defensively. Riley Smith, who they traded in the offseason, is an excellent defensive winger. William Karlsson, as good as it gets. He was their lockdown defensive center all playoffs against the toughest matchups. The list goes on and on. They've got so many defense. And then Jack Eichel took his off the puck game to another level in the playoffs and was just spectacular in his back check and his forecheck. So I think they help. But they've had that for a few years. I think what made them different this year was Bruce Cassidy's system just fit this group so well. Pete DeBoer is a great coach and runs a great system, and it works everywhere he goes. Everywhere the guy goes, they're deep in the playoffs for a reason. He's a great coach, but I just think Bruce Cassidy's system fit this team a little better. It's more of a compact zone defense that kind of keeps everyone around the net, and you just try to take the inside of the slot away from teams, and you kind of let them have the puck on the outside. Whereas with Pete DeBoer, they were kind of chasing the puck around a little more. And I think Vegas is built to play that compact zone because they're big, strong, and they have long sticks, all of them. So they're big, long guys with a lot of range, and it just makes it really tough to complete passes through the middle of the ice, which is how you score goals in the NHL. So I think it allowed their big defensemen to kind of take ownership of the front of the net. They're not moving around the zone. They're staying in one spot, and I'm protecting this territory, and they did a really good job of it. They didn't let teams in front of the net. And then it allows those defensive forwards to be a little closer to the net, to make the impact that they can make. So I just think, like I said, I think it was a combination of, they have great personnel, both at forward and defense. And then Bruce Cassidy's system just seemed to fit this group really well. And they learned it so quickly. I thought there would be a learning curve. I thought the first half of the year they would struggle defensively because it was such a drastic change, but they picked it up pretty much right away. Even Bruce Cassidy was like surprised at how fast this team picked it up. So it was a perfect match.
And with that, obviously with the Golden Knights, many people look to Kelly McCrimmon, sorry, and just how they've built this team through the expansion draft, but also just how cutthroat they've been. You know, you mentioned Fleury, Pacioretty, like a lot of big guys they've traded out or let go of. How much influence do you think their approach to kind of team making will kind of be passed around because the NHL is a copycat league? Like how likely do you think other teams will be doing similar things and maybe getting rid of guys
Yeah,
quickly?
it's super interesting, and I don't know the answer to that. It's going to be fun to see what happens over the next couple of years. Like when you hear, I don't know how many times over the last 3 years the Golden Knights did something and compared it to Tampa Bay. Like they
Oh,
like every move they would make, they like when they signed Alex Pietrangelo, they're like, we look at Tampa Bay and they've got Victor Hedman. You need that defenseman to win. They do something else, and it's like, well, Tampa Bay did this. Like they're clearly modeling what they're doing off of a dynasty almost. I mean, as much of a dynasty as you can
oh,
have in the salary cap era. I'm curious if it will happen with the Golden Knights, if teams will copy that. And I don't know so much about the cutthroat trading, but to me, it's the aggressive acquisitions. You hear so many GMs say, well, in the salary cap era, it's so hard to make big trades. You can't make the cap work. You can't make the salaries fit. It's too hard to make big trades. You have to give up too much. Well, the Golden Knights were not afraid, and they showed that it's not as hard as people make it seem. I mean, they trade for Mark Stone. That's a
oh,
blockbuster deal, bringing in a captain. They gave up the picks. They made it work. They sign Alex Pietrangelo. He's the biggest fish in free agency. They give him that 7-year deal, mega contract. They made it work. They had to get rid of their number one defenseman at the time, which was Nate Schmidt. That clearly was an upgrade. It worked out. Jack Eichel. How many times have teams said we can't trade for a number one center? There's you have to draft one. Well, they proved you have to. It has to be the right scenario. I mean, the guy needed a neck surgery that the team wouldn't let him have, and that forced him onto the trade block. But still, when those situations, you say like, oh, that player never becomes available. But I feel like we say that every year about somebody.
yeah.
This guys like this don't become available. I'm curious if GMs will be more willing to make those aggressive moves. And if you need a number one center and one comes available, who cares what it costs draft pick wise, what it costs salary wise? We'll find a way to make it fit. We need this player to win a championship. And the Golden Knights did that with several different players, and it ended up working out. I think if the Golden Knights had missed this championship and their window closed and they never won one, I think teams would have said, see, that's why you can't
Yeah.
do that, because it puts you in cap trouble. Look at them. They're always having to trade players away because they're in cap trouble. But you win a championship and it totally changes everyone's view on it. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe that's the way to do things. It's going to be interesting. I have no idea if teams will copy it, but it's going to be fat. I'll tell you this, if everyone starts copying what the Golden Knights have done for the last few years, the NHL is going to be way more fun to cover,
Yeah.
because it suddenly becomes the NBA where you're just trading
Oh,
superstar players all over the place. I would be very happy if teams decided to copy the Golden Knights and trade and sign as many players as they can. It'd make the league more fun.
just with that, is there any chance they're in on Carlson? Because I just think that's like the biggest NBA kind of blockbuster super team kind of acquisition.
I would say probably not. Their defense was really good this year, and I just don't. His contract is massive. They would have to trade like half their defense core just to make it fit. So I'm going to say no on him. I was kind of thinking about DeBrincat though. Like
Yeah,
during
no, yeah,
when
no,
they
no, like,
traded Riley Smith, when they traded Riley
yeah,
Smith,
that's
I was
exactly it.
talking to our Senators writer, Ian Mendez, at the draft. We were in Nashville when it happened, and he was like, "Do you think Vegas could be in on DeBrincat?" And I'm like, "Dude, it makes a lot of sense. It seems like the kind of move they would make." And then obviously they signed Barbashev a few hours later, so that kind of put that to bed. But like I said, I'm always anytime they find a way to make some cap space, my ears perk up. I'm like, okay, who's the biggest name on the block? Because that's who they're probably going for.
No, no, no. Like I'm actually here in Ottawa, and a friend of the show is Ian Mendez. But yeah, no, I remember my on Twitter blowing up when that trade for Riley Smith, because everyone thought was like, what does Vegas have? Can they trade Thompson to the Sens? All that kind of stuff. We need a goalie. This was before Corpusalo, of course. And
Yeah.
yeah, no. But with that, I want to ask you a little bit about obviously with Vegas as a market, and then how would you describe the market now? And do you think the Stanley Cup has made Vegas kind of cross that threshold and become a full-blown hockey market?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Vegas is really taken to hockey. And maybe it's because it just happened and we haven't really I haven't really seen the impacts. I don't think it's
Hmm.
that different now that they won a Stanley Cup,
Okay.
because I mean, Vegas was already all in. I mean, this team has sold out every game in franchise history. They've never had a home game at T-Mobile Arena that wasn't sold out and above capacity because they have standing room seats. They have like it's called Hyde Lounge. It's a nightclub up on the third level, and it's just standing room. So that place always has a few thousand people. So they have not had a game that wasn't over 100% capacity in 6 years. So and then even just aside from that, like you drive around town, every car you see has a license plate, a Golden Knights license plate, or a Golden Knights sticker on it, or a flag sticking out of their window. It's everywhere you go. And then I play hockey, and I've seen the growth of people playing the sport in Vegas, which is another, like that's how you grow it, right? Kids playing hockey grow up to be season ticket holders. So you like before the Golden Knights got to Vegas, there were only 2 rinks in town, 3
Wow.
total sheets of ice, one with 2 sheets, one with 1, and that was more than enough. The ice wasn't even full back then. Now they've built 2 new facilities, both with 2 sheets each, so they've gone from 3 to 7, and that's not even close to enough ice my men's leagues
Wow.
games start at midnight sometimes,
Oh my God.
because there's just so much hockey going on that like basically they don't shut the rink down until 1:30 in the morning, and then there's at 6 in the morning there's already games going on the next day, and that's 7 days a week basically. So they're already thinking about building another one. They haven't started the construction, but there's plans to build another rink, and then there's another rink that has 1 rink that they're thinking about expanding to 2, so we may have as many as 10 sheets in the next
Oh my
couple
God.
years.
Okay.
And like I like talking to people that run these rinks, they're like, we expect if we were to build 2 more sheets, we expect it to be filled up the ice time instantly. Like the moment it opens, it'll be full. So the amount of people playing hockey in Vegas has exploded. I think the number, this is just off the top of my head, so don't quote me, but there were like 80 something kids under the age of 8 playing hockey before the Golden Knights got in the entire state of Nevada,
Oh my
80
God.
something kids under the age of 8. And now that number is like 1,500 or something. It's over 1,000. It's like a
Wow.
crazy amount of growth in just 6 years. So yeah, it's this city is
Hmm.
a legitimate hockey town. We'll see what happens when there's some lean years. That's always the
Yeah.
test, right? Like it's easy to be a hockey town when your hockey team is the best team in the league and they're trading for all the best players and it's a lot of fun. Eventually they're going to suck. That's how pro sports work. There will eventually be some time where they don't win games and they aren't in the playoffs, and that will be the true test. Can this city sustain the sellouts and the excitement about this team when they aren't winning playoff games and when they aren't winning Stanley Cups? We'll see. We don't know when that's going to happen. Eventually it will, and that'll be the true test. But so far to this point, everything you can possibly look at, this city has fallen in love with the sport of hockey, which is really cool to see.
And there's a lot of talk of expansion again in the NHL and maybe Arizona moving. What do you think expansion teams or new relocation teams in the NHL, what can they maybe learn from Vegas and their story and just being so successful? Maybe other than the fact that the expansion rules have changed, so they might not be as good, but even look at Seattle making the second round in their second year. So well, what do you think Vegas did so right to kind of make the team good on and off the ice?
Yeah, on the ice, I mean, they're obviously all going to try to win. So I don't know how much you can learn from that. But I think that off the ice, the Golden Knights did a really good job of connecting with the community and being part of that. Like, I think it's also, they had an advantage that other teams probably won't have. The advantage they had was Vegas, the city of Las Vegas had never had a major pro sports team. And these people in this city wanted one so bad, even if it wasn't the sport that they followed, which for most of them, it was not hockey. They were going to be all in on whatever team they got. So the Golden Knights were the first team ever. So they just, and then they're in the community. They're doing charity events. They're holding charity softball games. They're just everywhere in the community. And I think that the city really bonded with the team over that. If you're another team, if you're an expansion team to a city that already has pro sports, you're obvious that same you don't have
Yeah.
that. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to work a lot harder to get a connection with the fans than the Golden Knights did. So I think that there are some things that maybe you can't copy. It's just how it worked out here. But I would say that building up that connection with the fans and with the community was a huge part of why the Golden Knights are so popular here. Aside from just the winning.
And going forward, obviously this team next year they have the same essentially that I read your piece, the same decor, pretty similar forward group. Just what do you think of the team next year, and what are the chances they could maybe even repeat next year?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be really good again. I expect them to be one of the best teams in the league. They only lost Riley Smith, and now they've got Ivan Barbashev for the whole season. Remember, he was only there since the deadline. So I don't know if he fills Riley Smith's spot, but you could argue that that was a good trade-off for them, getting a player that's 5 years younger. So this team should be really strong. In terms of their chances to repeat, it's you got to get a lot of luck, right? And I think most of that is health-wise. I mean, this team was ravaged by injuries for 2 years. Last season, they missed the playoffs because everyone was hurt. And then this season, at certain points in the regular season, it looked like they were heading for a similar outcome with Mark Stone out with another back surgery and a bunch of goalies hurt. And then all of a sudden they get to the playoffs and nobody got hurt for 3 months. And they had basically the exact same lineup. I mean, Laurent Brossoit was the only player that got hurt in the playoffs. And then Adin Hill comes in and he's even better. So they had no issues with injuries. And what are the odds of that happening again? Probably not great. So that they would need to stay healthy if they're going to make another run. If they can, I think this team can absolutely repeat. They just destroyed the league through these playoffs. Like, it was one of the most impressive. I wrote a story on just the numbers of how dominant they were. You don't see this in the Stanley Cup playoffs very often, where a team runs through the league the way Vegas did. So if they were to stay healthy, they're absolutely in position to try to repeat. This is hockey, so there's a lot of variance. A lot of things go right, a lot of things go wrong for teams that are kind of out of your control, and you just have to hope it all happens. And this year it did for Vegas. Will it happen again? We'll see. I think they're putting themselves in a position. That's all you can do, right? As front office and as a team, all you can do is put yourself in position. We're one of the teams that if everything goes right for us, we're going to win the cup. And I think Vegas is right back there.
And I, before I let you go, and thanks so much, Jesse, for taking the time and coming on. I always ask our NHL guests just about if you were NHL commissioner, Jesse, for the day, and you could change one rule, what rule would you change?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think changing offside would be fun.
That's
Do you
a
get that
lot
a
of
lot?
people. A lot of people say offside. Yeah.
So I grew up not having the money to play travel ice hockey, and I played a lot of roller hockey because of it. And I've transitioned now to where I just play ice hockey, but for a while there I was playing almost exclusively roller hockey, and roller hockey has no offside, and it's a lot of scoring and it's a lot of fun, and now it's also 4-on-4, so that opens things up a little bit. But the no offside rule creates a lot of offense. And in a league that is kind of leaning that way, it's getting away from the physical, big, huge checks, and it's more towards the skill. And every draft class we see comes in gets more and more skilled and more talented. And we see scoring is going up. I could see the potential for some really fun hockey if they were to change. But then there's part of me that's the traditionalist that's like, no, I like the way that totally changed the way the sport is. And I like the trying to play the territory game and keep the puck in the zone and all that. So I don't know. It's tough, but I think just off the top of my head right here, without thinking more, the offside is probably what I would go with.
Would it make any sense? I'm just thinking of keep bringing back the 2-line pass, but there's no offside, but you still have the blue line. So it's like you can't just cheat and go like just in front of the net and like do a Sean Avery or something like that. And while the other team's on the other side, maybe I'm just thinking of that off the top of my head. But yeah. Thanks so much, Jesse, for taking the time and doing this. I really appreciate it. I just want to ask you quickly though, just because I always ask journalists just a little bit at the end about their career. And I want to ask you, what advice would you maybe give to young journalists coming up in the industry? And it's been very volatile. There's been layoffs and everything. So just what advice would you give to journalists?
Yeah, it's a tough industry. It is. Even at The Athletic, we've had layoffs recently that were really tough to deal with. And it seems like every week there's another publication laying people off. It's a tough industry, but I will say, like, my advice for people that are just getting into it, or say you're in college and you're pursuing a journalism degree, is to just write as much as you can for as many different publications as you can. And you don't have to wait. Like, I think my one regret when I was in college is I felt like, okay, well, maybe once I'm like a junior or a senior, then I can start writing for the school paper and reaching out to newspapers to do freelance work. And then once I started doing it, I was like, I should have done this 2 years ago. I could have done it 2 years ago, and I would have had even more experience than I have now, because I think the classes are important and you should learn what your professors have to say. I'm not saying that's not important, but you'll learn way more stringing for a newspaper, doing some freelance work. And like the way what I did when I was in Vegas when I was young, and I had some great journalists here locally that kind of helped me figure this out. But if there's an event, a tournament happening in your city, and there's a team that's coming, and you think, especially nowadays, newspapers don't send reporters on the road as much. Call the newspaper of that team that's team is coming to your city and say, hey, I am a junior in college. I work for the school paper. Would you want a story on this team? And maybe they'll give you $50, maybe they'll give you $20, whatever it is. You get your byline in that newspaper. I was getting bylines in like the Orange County Register in California, all these, like, I never even went to California, and I had a byline there. And it does multiple things. One, it teaches you a lot about how this job actually works. Like, you're actually doing the job, so that when you go for a job interview, you know, I can do this job. I've done it. And two, it makes you a bunch of connections. That's like the most important way. Like that's almost more important than how good you are at writing in this industry, is who you know and what kind of connections you have to try to get a job. So the more you do that, the more people you talk to, the more people you work with, when you graduate, the better chance you have of getting a job based on those connections. And like I said, it'll help you actually with confidence, knowing you could do the job because you've done it. So that would be my advice: is don't just go to school and then graduate and then try to be a journalist. Try to be a journalist as soon as you possibly can, and in any way you can.
Well, thanks so much, Jesse, and I definitely know listeners will take that advice. And thanks so much for taking the time and coming on. I really appreciate it, and hopefully, you guys go in Vegas, go deep again in the playoffs, and maybe you see William Karlsson with another speech, and Bruce Cassidy being right about back to back and all that fun stuff. So, as a Sens and Jets fan, I hope not, especially when you guys beat my Jets in the spring. But thanks again, Jesse, for taking the time and doing this, and good luck and have a great summer.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me.